Hi everybody. Right now we're going to go ahead and talk about probably the most useful tool in all of Illustrator, the shape tool. So the shape tool is going to be this little box right here. But first we want to make sure that all of our tools are open. So if you don't see a full bar of tools right here on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll want to go ahead and click on this little three dot down below here where it says Edit Toolbar, and then go at the top here where it says All Tools and this little hamburger looking icon right here. We want to make sure that Advanced is selected. That makes sure that all of your tools possible are available to you. It is, so I'm going to go ahead and click off to the side here because everything's open. So with my rectangle tool, generally what happens is that every time you open up the program, and it doesn't matter what type of program you're using, so whether you're using layout or whether you're using typography or whatever it happens to be, or again back to painting, that your rectangle tool is always going to be there. Now the rectangle tool, we call it that because it certainly has that sort of square rectangle shape. But below this, there are a subset of tools. Now again, we have this little drop-down menu. We know so because of the triangle. If I left-click and hold, these are all the other shape tools that are down below. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead one tool at a time, and I'm going to show you how to draw and do some changing and manipulate the tools and give you some basic steps to go ahead and begin doing some drawing. So we'll go ahead and start with the rectangle tool first. So I'll select that. And up above, we talked about last time, you have your fill and your stroke. So the fill goes in the object, the stroke is the outline of the object. So right now on the fill, I'm going to select that and put a nice color in there. Let's go blue, and then I go back and click on my rectangle. Now if I move my cursor in on the left-hand side, I'm going to left-click and drag, and a box will appear. But you'll notice also simultaneously in the lower right, you'll see this in layer 1, which we're automatically on. You'll see the box appear. And I'll left-click right now. 1, 2, 3. Left-click and release, and there it is. And notice in my box down below it shows a blue box. Now I can go ahead and with that object I can draw another one. So there's another object, another one, another one, another one, another one. So you see I can just keep drawing those one right on top of the other. And all I do is left click, drag, release. Now a couple of things that you could do with the object while you have it. Okay, so I can left click and drag, and you notice that it has this bounding box around it with these white dots and a center dot. This is basically my objects where I can transform the object and change it up a little bit. So again, if I move my cursor to the object, notice it becomes either a rounded little icon or rounded arrow. If I move it on, it becomes a double arrow. So the rounded one, left click, and I can drag it. Oops, excuse me, Command Z that, is that I can go ahead, left click and drag, and it will allow me to rotate. See, that allows me to go and rotate my object. If I go back in, it becomes a double arrow. I can left click and drag, and I can shrink it up. But also I can make it narrow. I can make it really fat. I can change it upright all different ways. But let's say that you want to change it, but you want to lock the proportions as you do. Well, simply, and this works for every single shape tool, you just want to hold the Shift key when you go to one of the corners and you drag in. So I'll hold the Shift key, left click and drag in, and notice now I cannot change it. It proportionally stays the same whether it's small or large. We're just up and down the scale, but it's not getting fatter or thicker or thinner. Okay, it's just staying proportionally the same. Now let's go ahead off here. So I've got this one over here, and I'm talking about how you can rotate, and I talked about how you can change color. But also while it's selected, I can change color and stroke. So this one is still selected, and so I can go back up here to the fill, give it a nice color, and I can take the stroke and I can change that color also. Now if I want to change the thickness of the stroke while it's still selected, I can either use this up and down arrow right here. Notice my thick strokeness on the orange and green square is getting a rectangle, is getting larger, right? I also have a drop-down menu here where I can go ahead and select from all kinds of different sizes here. I can go up to say 100, look how thick that is, versus down to say a nice 3-point. Okay, so I can go ahead and resize, rescale, change colors. Now if I select my black arrow, I can click and drag and move this above here, and there it is sitting on top. It's all in the same layer. We look at layer 1, it's all sitting right together right there, but I can go ahead and move it backwards within the same layer if I want to. Simply put the cursor over the object that's selected, right click on it, and there's an arrange here at the bottom. And if you go over to arrange, you can say bring to front, forward, backward, send to back. So I click on send to back. There it is. It's gone backwards. It's back behind here now. So I moved it back behind this object. Okay, so you can do that. You can move objects forward and backward within a layer, and you can change color, size, scale, and you can even select an object and move it around. Okay, this is layer 1. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lock this layer. So if I go back over to my layers, and you'll remember from the last video, the eyeball will hide it, and this empty space right here next to the right of the eyeball will lock it. Okay, so I'm going to lock it and hide it, and then I go down to the bottom here and I'm going to add a new layer. This new layer is this square with just a single plus sign inside. That's my create new layer. So now I've got a new one, and you'll notice the new layer is automatically deposited on top of the previous one. So new layers, remember that, new layers always go on top, but we can certainly click and drag it and move it down below if we need to. Now, let's go ahead and go into our next shape here. So if I left click on my shape tool and I go down to the rounded rectangle, that's the next shape to be able to play with. Now the rounded rectangle is a great one to use because watch what happens. If I left click and drag, you notice it's a rectangle, but the corners are softened, they're rounder. But you can go ahead and you can change that curvature a little bit if you'd like to. With many of the tools in here, with the tool selected, and if you've not released the left click on the mouse, you could go ahead and use the up or down arrows on your keyboard to change that roundness. Notice it gets rounder, and if I go back the other way, it goes out to a point, right? So I can literally just curve it a little bit, or I can curve it a lot. Okay, so I have that option here. So now what I have to do is go ahead and go ahead and just release, and there we go. There's my object. So I can, once again, I can go and left click and drag, and there's my next one, there's my next one, there's my next one. And I can do a vertical one, right? So you can do vertical ones, I can do horizontal ones, all different kinds of shapes there. But again, once I have it like this, I can change as much as I want, but once I release the mouse, I cannot change it. So again, I can change that curvature, right? Change that curvature of that object, go larger, smaller, etc., and then release. Now, one of the things that I can do also with this is same as before. I can go ahead and choose to move an object forwards and backwards within that layer. Simply select the object. Like I said, I've got this back one. Now see that this back one, the big one here is in the background. We select it, and I'll change the color to make it easier to see. There it is. And we can see that it's behind. Again, I can right-click, select it, and then right-click and go to the arrange on the bottom here and say bring to front. That I can move that around. So I need to readjust or rescale something. I can certainly do that at any given time. Okay. Now let's go ahead and lock this layer, and we'll go on and we're going to hide this layer. And then I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to hit my new layer, and my new shape here. I'm going to go down to the next tool down in the drop down menu. I go to the ellipse tool. Now ellipse is kind of a weird way to say it, but it means a rounded object. So an ellipse, or if I left click and drag, well, there it is. Left click and drag, and I can go vertical, horizontal. So I get all these different shapes, and I'm making an ellipse. Okay. Now what I can do though, so I want it to be perfect, just like with a square or the rounded rectangle or any of the tools, I hold the shift key when I do. Hold the shift key and then left click and drag and release, and notice that it stays perfectly, evenly proportioned. Look at that. Really nicely done. I can go and do that. Now, again, while it's still selected, if I selected any of those objects, I can go back in and change that filler color. See that? Right? I can take an object and I can, let's take this one and go ahead and change the color again here. And then I can right click on it while it's selected and go to arrange, send to back, right? So I can move forwards, backwards. One thing that I can do too is if I decide that if I have an object and I want to go ahead and turn the fill off while it's selected, all I have to do is go to the fill, select on it, and within this palette area of colors, if I look on the left hand side here, there's a box with a red slash. It says none. That basically that red slash that's on there means I can go ahead and I can go ahead and change that color. Let me go ahead and change that box right here. Oops. Let me pull that over here for you. And I'm going to change that color box here. I click on that drop down menu. I'm going to bring it over here so you can see that a little bit easier. Bring that over. Look on the red slash, and it turns it right off, right? You'll notice I can see and do that from down over here also. So let's make that easier for you. Let me click on this shape, and I go to the red slash. Boom, it turns it right off again. Pretty nice. Now what I can do here is I can go ahead and change, certainly if I want to change the thickness of something like before. So I've got my green shape right here, and I've got it selected on black. Well, I can go ahead and select that black and maybe make it, let's go ahead and go blue, and let's up the scale on it. The drop down menu, and look at that, I can go ahead and make that thicker and larger also. Okay, so again, just like we did with the other tools, I can make them larger or smaller. Now let's go ahead, I'm going to lock this layer, hide it, and add a new layer. We go back over to our ellipse tool, and now I go to the polygon. Now for the polygon and star, the next two tools, I can basically show you that I basically left click and drag, and there's my object, my shape. I can rotate. But one of the things that's unique about this one is, again, I can change the number of corners or edges. So if I hold the left click on the mouse and I use the up or down arrow, so I can add more points or less points, right? So I can add less all the way down to a triangle, or I can add more, right, for a simpler shape, right? And once again, I can layer, I can change colors, all the same things that I was doing before. Now I'm going to lock this layer and hide it and add a new layer. My last one here was go back into the star tool, and the same thing happens again. So I click and drag a star and multiple shapes and colors. I can go ahead and change the color while it's selected, right? I can go ahead and change the color here. I think it's color selected there. And or also I can change it over here in the swatch library over here on the right hand side. You notice I can change it right here just by selecting those colors as they are live because I'm selected on painting. So I can go ahead right now and select another one here, click cancel, and click and drag myself another star, etc. And while it's selected, certainly I can rotate it using my black arrow and moving my cursor to one of the four corners there. I can rotate that object, right? So I can rotate it, I can shrink it in or out, right? And I can change color, thickness, and stroke. All those different things that you've seen me do so far. Now the last thing on here, so I'm going to lock and hide this layer. My last one I want to show you is basically create a new layer. The last tool in there is what we call the flare tool. The flare tool is literally just that. It literally creates, if you will, lens flares. So these are great for like a metallic surface, right, or a piece of glass. It's really nice for it, but it's also good for outer space effects too. Works really nice for that. So you can see I'm going and dragging and dropping all these different little shapes on here. So these are sort of the last ones here. So we don't really use this one very often, but it's kind of a fun one to take a look at. So I'm going to go ahead right now and lock this layer up and hide it. So now all of my layers are hidden, but I've got everything there. To bring them all back up, I can just left click and drag and then open all those up. And look at that, I got everything here. Now I can change the order of those objects. Let's say I want to take the blue squares, which are on layer 1 there at the very bottom, and I want to bring them up to the top. So if I left click and drag, move it up to the top up here, now they're on top. If I want to take these green shapes and left click and drag and move those up to the top, I can do that, right? If I want to bring the lens flares up to the top, click on that layer and then bring it up to the top, and then they come on top. But the lens flares, you just see these white colors because, remember, lens flares are transparent. So what we've gone ahead and done here is we've gone ahead and created multiple layers. We've experimented with creating different kinds of shapes. We can go ahead and change the order of the layers, right? We can slowly either hide or selectively bring out and hide one layer at a time. And if we want to go back and make any additions or changes to that layer, we have to unlock it, select the layer, and then we can come back in and we go and add a new tool or object to that particular given shape or space. And come back in here and draw right inside here again. So can I draw large or small? Sure, I can do that. If I want to do small or big, I can do that too. Let's go ahead and hide everything. Then we show everything, or we can unlock everything. My recommendation is always to lock your layers as you go, so that way you protect your artwork and you don't accidentally have one thing linked to another. So go ahead and practice this for a few minutes,